panel. This is being held in Committee Room 1. I just need to remind everyone this room has cameras and picks up sound from the microphones in the ceiling. Cameras and the microphones will track the person speaking during the meeting, so please bear this in mind with regards to background noise during the meeting. Given this, I would also like to remind members of a couple of things. Please continue to speak clearly and do not whisper. Please keep other sounds to a minimum. Whispering, shuffling of papers, and typically typing loudly on a keyboard are sounds that may be picked up by the microphones. Please also be conscious of what you have on your screens, laptops, tablets. Although it is unlikely the camera may pick these up, they may appear on the screen. And please also bear in mind that the ceiling's microphones are sensitive and may pick up conversations in the room, including informal remarks. This last point is particularly important as the meeting is being live streamed and the recording of the meeting will be available afterwards. And I'll just remind members also, given the agenda item today, how much more public interest there may be following today's meeting. We're not expecting a fire drill this afternoon, so if the alarm does sound, please follow the officers out of the building and gather in the cathedral grounds. The panel has identified a number of key inquiries of inquiry relating to the agenda item discussed today. I will ask those members who have previously identified a question to ask their questions first, and then any additional questions will be following after that. Please could I take the opportunity to ask you all to be concise when asking your questions or providing responses so that we ensure there's enough time to cover all key lines of inquiry. We move to the first item of business, which is the membership apologies, substitutes and declarations of interest. I would like to first welcome Councillor Dave Harris, who's been formally appointed as a substantive member for Colchester. Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome here today, and I'd like to thank Councillor Lee for his work previously and contributions to the panel. Moving on to apologies, we have apologies from John Gilly-Ross, the chairman, Councillor Mark Barnett from Harlow District Council, Councillor Mary Cunningham from Braintree District Council, who's substituted today by Councillor Graham Butland. Councillor Jay Lapland from Brentwood Borough Council is being substituted today by Councillor Ben Rigby. Councillor Simon Burwood from Malden District Council is being substituted by Councillor Don Driver. Welcome. And we have apologies from Councillor Emma Callahan from Brentwood District Council. Are there any other apologies to note? In which case, I'd like to welcome anyone for declarations of interest. Councillor Ricky.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a declaration that my stepson is a serving officer of Essex, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the second item, which is the minutes. You've all seen minutes previously circulated of the meeting held on December the 5th, 2024. Any comments or queries on those? Can we approve those? Next item is questions to the chairman from the members of the public. There are none, so we'll move straight on then to the proposed fire and rescue precept. And the purpose of this is to recommend for endorsement the fire and rescue precept for 2025-26 that sets out the overall level of resources in the proposed budget for 25-26, and the budget has been set in line with the objectives previously included in the new fire and rescue plan 2024-2028. At this point, I'd like to welcome the Commissioner and his team, and we'll pass over to them for this item.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you here. So the proposed fire and rescue precept, I would just like to start actually with a thanks to everyone who participated in the working groups that we have had over recent weeks, going through the work up to this budget, both the base level, then the challenges, and then the impact of the government funding settlement. I hope that's meant that you have had the opportunity to digest the proposal in detail. You have the paper in front of you. I won't read it to you. It has been a challenging budget round. This budget is intended to deliver against the fire and rescue plan and put us in a position to deliver on the new community risk management plan, which is currently in progress and will be out soon. The main challenges really have centred around recent pay settlements, where firefighter pay awards over the last 3 years actually have been ahead of the overall increase in our spending strength, spending power. We've also had increased employer contribution rate for the firefighters' pension scheme, and in particular, in this funding round, we've seen the removal of the services grant and the funding guarantee grant, which is equivalent to £1.5 million for Essex County Fire and Rescue Service. I understand why the government's done that. We all understand it is a difficult and challenging economic environment, and political decisions around priorities have to be made. That money, as I understand it, has gone into the recovery grant, which is a fund available to local authorities, around £600 million available to local authorities across the country. However, fire and rescue services do not qualify. So we have not been able to go back, and that's been a challenge that we've had to deal with. We have a proposal in front of you. That proposal, I think, puts us in a situation to continue our service delivery in the current year in the shape and way in which we are delivering it now. So there will be no compromise or reduction in service in 25-26. I'd like to make the point, though, that it is not really sustainable. So what we've had to do to square the circle on the fire and rescue service budget is put on hold a number of medium-term projects. Significant amongst those is our live fire training facility. That is something which is currently provided on the Wethersfield former MOD site. As you will be well aware, that's currently in place for an asylum camp in the county, and there are plans post the asylum camp to turn it into a prison site. At the moment, we still have our licence and our space, but that is not going to be the case forever. So we do need to make alternative provision. And as you'll be well aware, these things take time. So we have been working up plans for a new, modern, more environmentally friendly live fire training facility to be based elsewhere in the county. And those plans we will not be able to execute in the way that we wanted to in the coming financial year 25-26. We'll continue the work. We can't ditch it completely, but we won't be able to actually start the capital spend. Similarly, we have had to put on pause the move to a joint fleet workshops with Essex Police. That's an issue for both the services. But again, the facilities that we have are at the end of their useful lives. But with a little bit of work, we can keep it going for a bit longer. So we don't need to do it now, but we can't keep it going for very much longer. So that's going to have to change. And we have a programme that we'd like to execute of investment in our fire and rescue stations across the county, improving them, making them more better basis for our firefighters and better basis for our increasingly gender diverse firefighters, so that we're actually catering for people who are. They used to be all for men, didn't they? They're not. We need to move that on better than we have at the moment. Again, that has had to go on hold for the time being. We don't have reserves available to fund those investments at the moment, and the level of borrowing required would be unaffordable. So those things are not being done at the moment. I think, I'm really pleased that we are able to continue the level of service provision at the level that it is. That is great. And recognising the environment we're in, that's a good thing. But I think as well, what we do need to recognise is that the comprehensive spending review which is coming in the spring. The government has said it will be there in the spring. We don't know whether it's going to be 2 years or 3 years. The general rumour is that it will be 3 years. The general rumour is that the spring means April, but the government commitment is what I just said. And we've been asked to submit evidence for that now. We have done so. That obviously includes what we'd like to do in the medium term. But if we don't get the funding for these things out of the comprehensive spending review, then we will have to look at changing the way that we deliver the service. So those of you who have voices and strings to pull, voice and strings to pull, please do so on our behalf as we move forward with our comprehensive spending review programme. And we're very happy to share a briefing with you if you would like to have one about what it is that we're asking. All of that really tells you that we don't have the scope to hold back on the council tax this year. So we have been given preset flexibility up to £5 for a band D property without having to go for a referendum. As you will know, no PTC has ever, there have been referendums and none of them have ever succeeded. So I'm not minded to go for a referendum. That is an equivalent to a 6% increase in the council tax precept for Essex County Fire and Rescue Service for the coming year. And the proposal in front of you is that we take it in full in order to mitigate the impact of the deferred decisions that we're having to make at the moment and maintain the current level of service. You will be very well aware that if we don't take that precept increase this year, that of course compromises our medium-term financial strategy. It's gone forever. There's no flexibility. If you don't take 0.5% this year, you can't take it next year instead. So if it's gone, it's gone. You'll all know that from your own authorities. So that is the proposal in front of you. That is my request. Please, would you endorse my proposal to raise the council tax precept for Essex County Fire and Rescue Service to support the budget that I've just described to you, as proposed by the Chief Fire Officer and his team, of just under 6%.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have two questions. First, both from Councillor Ben Rigby, and then I'll open it up to any further questions we might have.
Thank you. In relation to the fire service, what proposals funded by the precept in the budget are you most enthusiastic about in terms of the service residents receive from their fire service?
So the thing I think that makes the most difference in the medium term is the investment in prevention and protection activity. You will all be aware, we are all aware of the Grenfell disaster, true disaster, and the human cost that involved. I think that was something which caused us to step back and reassess our potential prevention and protection activity across the county. We recently held a remediation workshop for all of our partners, and thank you, almost everyone turned up. We need to have a plan. Grenfell, the second part of the Grenfell report came out at the end of last year, and it has more recommendations, and we need to have a joint plan as to how to execute on those. That is, for me, the most important bit of what we're investing in. But to be honest with you, the other bits that we're having, that we have putting forward here, are just things that we can't really do without. So 3 million operational equipment, including the foam replacement and the new rescue helmets. We need to stay in business. We need to stay in replacing end-of-life vehicles. We have extended the life of our firefighting vehicles to a level greater than that of most fire and rescue services across the country now. We need to have the ones that work. Investments in IT, we need to do that to replace existing systems that are coming to the end of life. Training, I'm sure you understand, training is absolutely vital. That is a relatively small amount, actually. It's a remarkably small amount of investment in training this year. And asset protection and maintenance work, we have been through a rigorous assessment of condition And this is the stuff that we need to do now. I don't know. Mr. Hilton, do you want to add anything to that?
No, you've covered it really well, Commissioner. I think the only thing I would add to that is obviously we know that our operational resourcing is really important. We do still struggle with on-call availability, and therefore the resources we do have, it's about maximising those. The £5 flexibility ensures that we can maintain the same level of service. Without that £5, we wouldn't have the same number of firefighters that we have available to us now, which would mean that availability challenge will become even more greater.
Just by way of follow-up, obviously, in terms of next year's budget, can you point to any proposals which directly benefit the work of ordinary firemen and women, whether full-time or retained, which will give them confidence in the service as an employer? I mean, you mentioned IT and training and things like that. Perhaps highlight a few things from there.
I think the big ones really are the live fire training facility. That is a really vital piece of training that they need to know that they have been properly trained on that, because they're going into, I mean, I've been to the Wethersfield facility and been through, not the full training, but had a go. It is pretty scary. Yeah, I have a few nerves. So that is part of the core job. That's really up there. Anything that you want to?
And that the continued investment in equipment, which is something that firefighters, particularly Essex, is really fortunate. It has good equipment, and we need to maintain that level of standard that we've got. That and the continued work that we do in terms of investment in training. The Commissioner points to the £200,000 investment. Ideally, we'd like to make that part of the base. We'd like to increase our establishment in training. This budget hasn't enabled us to do that, so the £200,000 will have to come out of reserves this year. We'd like to substantiate that further, because training in the modern environment as a firefighter becomes even more important given the risks that they face.
Buckley. Yeah, just if I may, like to follow up on the point made by Councillor Rigby, and that relates to future investment. And I appreciate that under the current circumstances, future investment is going to be restrained somewhat. But how are we managing to deal with changes in the way that society is? And I'm thinking in terms of two aspects. One is the increased pressure on local authorities to have very high tower blocks built, which obviously cause an issue for recovery in the event of a fire. And secondly, about the expansion in the use of lithium-ion batteries, particularly in cars. And I have actually written to the Commissioner about that previously. But I'm just concerned to know how the service will contain those risks in the future, because they're changing rapidly.
So I think, thank you very much, Councillor, for the question. I think on the tower blocks issue, that is very much why we held the round table on remediation and making sure that we have a coordinated approach. We actually know part of it was just sort of getting in principle agreement that we need a protocol about who's responsible for what. Because the big problem with Grenfell was people saying, well, that's not mine, it's someone else's. Well, let's actually understand whose is what and what we're all going to do as a partnership, rather than sticking to our own statutory obligation and trying not to be concerned about other people's. I think if we do that together, we will be able to develop new facilities, new premises, new estate in the way that we need to, without building in bad risks. On lithium ion, that is an investment in future training. I think we've had, as you said, we've had correspondence about it before. There is a lot of learning going on now. I've seen demonstrations about how we deal with lithium-ion batteries that ignite. The problem, of course, is that they don't quite need the spark that other things have. It is the contact between the contents which actually creates the heat and creates the crisis. At the moment, people are telling me that the best way to deal with a EV car which has got a lithium-ion problem is to dump it in a container full of water and wait until the heat dissipates. That's not going to be that easy, but I'm sure we will find better ways of doing it. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I mean, the lithium-ion battery, particularly around cars, is a piece of research that's going on internationally. And Essex is well linked into that in terms of that changing risk and how we deal with them. Probably more prominent for us around lithium-ion is the careless disposal of lithium-ion batteries, particularly those that end up in waste recycling sites, which then can mean that we have a long protracted incident in those places. As for the extinguishing of things like fires in the cars, etc., at the moment, that isn't a particular risk. The bigger risk is things such as e-scooters, and that's particularly around those e-scooters that are bought and then modified in some way or charged incorrectly. So there's a behavioural thing that we need to do to help educate communities. We're supportive of them. They're about, climate change, but it's about using those products safely. We do an awful lot of work nationally, and also we do an Office of Product Safety through government to make sure that we raise the profile around those. Just on the point about tower blocks, the Commissioner is right. There is a remediation challenge for the country at the moment around buildings. Hopefully moving forward, the work of Dame Judith Hackett and the review and the building safety regulator will mean that buildings built in Essex in the future will comply to the right standards, and the Fire and Rescue Service has a key part to play to ensure that as those gateways are met by developers, we ensure that the buildings for the future don't have the same challenges that some of the stock that we have at the moment do.
Thank you.
Councillor Ricky.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question around the issues you've raised around asset replacement, if that's okay, Commissioner. So any responsible service will have an asset management policy that's backed up with an asset replacement plan. Just wondering how this budget will help you fit into any asset replacement plan that needs to be agreed and consolidated in upcoming years to enable you to replace rather than retrofit or re-life aged assets, and ensure that you continue to offer a first-class service from a fire perspective to the residents of Essex.
That is a very good point, and I should be upfront with you and say, in the meeting that we had where I agreed the Chief Fire Officer's proposed budget, we also agreed to waive our current asset management policy, so that it includes exceptions to our current asset management policy, on the proviso that we are looking to get back in line with that policy within the next year. But we can't do it at the moment.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, and thank you, Commissioner. You paint a picture there, which I respect, and I'm fully supportive of the 6% precept that you mentioned. Very supportive of that. But Essex is a growing county. Not in size, but in population, of course, because each district, each area, each city council has got a local plan that adds thousands of homes on it, which will stretch the budgets for future times. And I wanted to make sure that when you have the comprehensive review of these budgets that you talked about very eloquently there, that we influence that by making sure that we predict what the future looks like in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, with what the needs of the service is that meets the needs of the population.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, you're absolutely right. That is actually quite a lot of work to pull together, not just the 30-year ambition, but the 5-year ambition and the ambition within our 4-year medium-term financial strategy. I have been part of a coordinated push with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, National Fire Chiefs Council, Police Chiefs Council, and the Ambulance Service around planning, to say that what we need is for emergency service infrastructure to be recognised as part of national infrastructure and therefore be eligible for the Community Infrastructure Levy. I think we've got there. I think that's happening. That, of course, deals with the one-off investment that goes with the new build, provided it's a substantial new build. I mean, as ever, it depends on the major project, minor project. You know, obviously, it's not going to be part of people extending their house by a garage or a bedroom. Major developments will. In theory, the expansion of the tax base because of increased residential building provides for the increase in service. But that's not really how it works. We end up using that increase in tax base to maintain the service as it is. And we need, I think, to get through the comprehensive spending review to a position where we are actually making sure that that increase in the tax base is available for increase in service as and when we need it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Savage.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was interested to note the comment
Councillor Buckley made about the EV charging, and you suggested that we're working closely with developers with respect to EVs and building rigs, etc. Certainly in Castle Point, we're trying to utilise as much brownfield capacity as possible. We're seeing more developments now that have got stacker car parking coming through the Development Management Committee. We're seeing more flats that have got canopy parking. And we're seeing applications coming through from petrol stations with EV chargers that, in my opinion, are far too close to the existing petrol pumps, but that's another subject. What capacity have you got in terms of joined up thinking with developers? Because when I was querying some of these cases, there wasn't any information, not any decent information coming back my way to make the right, what I felt would be the right decisions for my residents.
We have got quite a lot of information we can make available.
Yeah, so we can pick up off line councillor Savage to see what we can do.
But we're not getting that round to you in your positions as planning committee members or cabinet members for development. We need to make sure we're doing that.
It just seemed to me that technology was moving a little bit faster than the law was moving.
Oh, that's true.
In terms of development.
Catch up.
It's a land.
Thank you. Yeah, very much support the increase and understand the situation. I find where I travel around to meetings that I think people are genuinely supportive of rises, provided that they can see firsthand and on the ground things that are happening. I'll just mention the point. I'm from Frinton and Walton Town Council's point of view, where I attended a meeting this week. I think they just felt a little bit lost from the initial communication in terms of the PCSOs potentially being cut and the correspondence and communication that was delivered, owing to the fact that they contribute to those PCSOs, and found it a little bit disorientated.
It is responsible related to the police fire panel.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
I'll come back to you later.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Would any other councillor like to, or member like to? Councillor Terry.
Thank you. Just a general high-level point, comments from Councillor Russell and Councillor Buckley regarding the new stuff coming through. One of the things I'm certainly experiencing right now is that, and I agree with the PFCC, that we need to have a far better approach and joined up thinking around planning committees, which affects all of us in local authorities, and the information that comes forward. I'm right in the middle of a silo, should we call? I think you're talking about silos, and government from the top level to the bottom. I think there's too many silos and people working in one. You mentioned that people working. We've got to look strategically, and that, I'm hoping when this comprehensive spending review that we've already been told what our housing target is for Southend City, which is huge. I think for South East Essex, including Castle Point, it's something like 35,000. It's massive. I have raised that before with you, but I'm hoping when we get to this comprehensive spending review that all manners of how we do things are focused on. The dreadful Grenfell experience was partly to do with planning. Things that gone through that weren't checked and weren't assessed properly. We need to have as a member of a council, you go to the planning committee and they'll say, oh, that's not so with this committee. That's another department. So if it's highways or building regs or noise, the whole thing. I know I'm going slightly off piste, but it's something we really need to address, and it will help us here as well. Thank you.
I wholly agree.
But I do support the increase.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members with regards to the fire precept? In which case, I'd just like to read out that the recommendation is that the Police, Fire and Crime Panel endorses the PFCC's decision to increase the fire and rescue precept 5.99, equivalent to an increase of £4.95 a year, from £82.62 to £67.57 for a Band D property, creating an additional council tax precepts. Anyone that would like to propose that? Councillor David Harris, seconded by Councillor Buckley. All those in favour? Against? Any abstentions? It's carried then.
Thank you very much indeed.
We then move on to the next item, which is the proposed police set. I'd just like to remind members that there was, just before the meeting, an addendum, which, in relation to the recent announcement from the Commissioner's Office and the government. So if we move forward, I just ask for notes of that additional was sent around. Seen that? Yes. Yeah. Okay. In this case, I'd like to introduce the report item, which is that we consider the proposed precept for 2025-26, and then pass over to the Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And I'll start with the same thanks as I did for the fire and rescue precept for those who've participated in the working groups. We actually had 4 rather than 3 for the police precept because it has been so difficult and such a challenge. But I'll also start with an apology. It is not our habit as the Office of the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, it's not my habit as Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner to give you late papers. But this is a late paper. You have an addendum which has arrived with you only half an hour before this meeting, which is a real challenge for you. I'm sorry, but it has been an extremely fast-moving environment. And I apologise also to those members of the media who won't actually have seen it yet because it won't have been circulated to you. It's been a very fast-moving environment. We went through the process as we normally would. Again, this is the overall. This is national. It's not particularly Essex. Depending on the shape of the different budgets across the country and the levels of reserves, some are caught by more than others. Perhaps just worth reminding everyone that we are the 3rd most tightly funded police service per capita in the country, along with Lincolnshire and Wiltshire. West Yorkshire is roughly the same size as us. We get £257 million in central government grant. They get 477. But they've got bigger crime problems than we have, so I'm not asking for theirs to be taken away. It's just the case that things are different across different parts of the country, and we are caught by that. We went through the process as usual. We had the provisional settlement announced on the 16th of December. Looking at where we are, we have successfully managed to invest in Essex Police for each of the last 8 years. And Essex Police has expanded as a result of that. So we have moved up from 2,850 officers to 3,755. And we are in a shape now, in a position now to be able to reduce crime. I'm really thrilled by the efforts that the Chief Constable and his teams have made in that regard. We have reduced antisocial behaviour by 3/4. We have halved homicide. We have halved burglary. Smaller crimes, especially rural crimes like hair coursing, also halved. We've even managed to change the tide in some of the most wicked problems, and I mean that in both the moral and the complex sense that we have in contemporary society, such as domestic abuse, where our levels of domestic abuse in the county are now down by over 15% from previous peaks, after years of unrelenting increase. And for that, I thank you for your support, and I thank the Chief Constable and his teams for their implementation. We need to be able to hold our strength at this level so that we can continue with that programme. The challenge is, of course, that, and I understand, the government has to set priorities, and the government's top priority is the National Health Service. That doesn't mean to say that they are neglecting policing or indeed fire and rescue. There have been increases this year. The government has increased the policing budget, which was 18.4 billion nationally, to 19.5. That's a 1.1 billion pound increase. But a chunk of that was the employers' national insurance contributions. That was 230 million of the 1.1 billion. And a chunk of it was the pay increase well ahead of inflation that was awarded last July as well. So that's together, that's 500 million, just over 500 million of the total 1.1. When we learned in December the shape of it, we realised we had a problem. We were left with a gap, even taking the full precept increase of £14, which is equivalent to 5.7%. Even taking all of that, we were left with a gap of £12.5 million in Essex Police's 407 million budget. Obviously, needs to expand this year for the increase in costs that I've just been outlining to you. Pays 81% of our total costs. See the employer national insurance contributions on top of that. So the Chief Constable and his team, I think, did a remarkable job finding additional savings and found another £7.2 million, which would be executable without compromising the service to the public. I think it would certainly stretch some of our internal resources, particularly amongst police staff, but it wouldn't hit the front line. That still left us with 5.3 million. And at that point, we realised we were going to actually have to, despite taking out over £12 million worth of savings in the year, we were still left with a 5.3 million gap. We were going to have to actually reduce the level of service. And the proposal that you will have read in the newspapers and indeed in the paper, it wasn't as explicit when we sent out the paper to you, because at that stage, the Chief Constable had not had a chance to talk to the representative bodies and his workforce. And of course, it is important that they hear that from him first rather than reading it in or online. But that was coordinated as an effort, and you saw the proposal to reduce the police service by all of our police community support officers, and in addition to lose another 65 posts amongst police staff, reduce the South East allowance for police officers, reduce the detectives' payment for specialist detectives, and reduce some of the operating hours of some of our facilities. We agreed that on the basis that it was the least worst option available to us and would spread the difficulty, the pain, across the organisation in the most equitable. I don't think we can use the word fair. I think we agreed that using the word fair felt bad. It doesn't feel fair, but it is equitable. We thought it was equitable. That, understandably, concern does enormously, caused, well, more than concern, it caused consternation, I think, across the county. And I would like to actually take this opportunity to thank those who spoke up very loudly. I know some of it was quite pointed against me, but nevertheless, it needed to be said and it needed to be heard. And I spent most of last week in Westminster with government, explaining how we got there and why. And as I said, this is a national problem. It's not particular to me, but I am also the national lead for finance for the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. So I wasn't just representing Essex, I was representing Lincolnshire and Wiltshire and Gloucestershire and Dorsetshire and quite a lot of other places as well at the same time, and had a lot of support from other people. We were heard. You were heard, colleagues were heard, MPs were heard. And I am really pleased that the government found another £100 million nationally for policing to put into neighbourhood policing last. They laid the written ministerial statement late Thursday. It was announced on Friday morning. We have had to work really quickly since then to work out what it means for us. Delighted that the government managed to get us a letter confirming our share of that on Friday afternoon, and also very pleased that they managed to get us a letter on Saturday with the outline of the grant conditions to fulfil that. So Chief Constable and I have been talking quite regularly, out of hours. And the Chief Constable spent yesterday with his team working through what that can mean for us. I think you had your Chief Officer group late last night. And we had a meeting this morning where the Chief Constable and his group proposed to me a revised budget. I am pleased to be able to tell you that if you approve the police precept increase of £13.95, which is mathematically the maximum we can do, which is 5.7%. If you approve that today, then we will be able to save all of our PCSOs, which is so much better than where I thought we were a week ago. It is still the least worst option. It's still not where we'd like to be, because we will still be having to reduce the South East allowance, having to lose the detectives payment, and we'll still be making some posts in police staff redundant, but the PCSOs themselves will stay. That is subject to the government approving our proposed investment in neighbourhood policing. There's a process to go through here. They said they're going to send us a template. We haven't got the template yet. We will have to fill in the template, send the template back. They will have to consider it. That will be a process which they have said is unlikely to conclude before the end of this financial year. So there is still a process to go through and a business case to approve, but it looks to us as though the additional money that we got on Friday will be enough to do that, and therefore the proposal in front of you today is that. I'm sure you've got lots of questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Before I go on to the questions, can I just highlight to members of the public, anyone else that's interested, that this addendum has now been published on the Essex County Council website in the usual place. So if anyone wishes to go and read that, they can do. We'll go through the usual line of questions we've received, and then I'll open up to anyone else that would like to ask. Bear in mind that some of these questions now might be slightly superseded, but I'll certainly carry on as normal, and then if colleagues wish to amend them at all, then feel free to do so. Councillor Rickey.
Thank you, Chairman. And first of all, may I just pass my thanks to all the work that your team have done, Roger, especially over the past few weeks, and Chief Constable, over the past few, not just few weeks, but the past few days as well, leading up to the start of this meeting. The first point I just want to make is that personally, I think it's been quite unfair on your staff to have to get to this point, which they've had to bear with over the past few days, knowing that their livelihoods could have been at risk, and to some extent there are still some that are at risk. Must be quite an unnerving and unsettling position to be in. So to hear some slightly improved news this afternoon is certainly a panel. I think the whole shame of the government fund is, I think it's lost on many that almost half of that goes on with the remuneration and national insurance. It's only right that we pay our frontline staff the salaries that they deserve. After all, they do provide the frontline service that we rely on in so many ways. Now, I've been a member of this panel for the best part of 5 years, and it has been a privilege to test you on how you're investing in Essex Police. And we hear about how you are investing in new technology, new ways to deliver a crime service, operational advancement and initiatives, and resource that gives us all confidence. I don't think what any of this panel or members of this panel want to start doing, Commissioner, is asking you why haven't we got funding to provide a frontline service. That is days of old questioning, and I think that's something that this panel would rather avoid going back to and regressing in the future. Much more, we'd rather spend our time in understanding how you are driving down crime through targeted investment in your service. So with that in mind, Commissioner, and bearing in mind the addendum that came out to us this afternoon, how tough has it been just to get to this point this afternoon, bearing in mind that in previous years, I wouldn't say it's been straightforward, but it's certainly been I'll draw attention to the amount of your staff's time and officer time that comes at an additional cost as well to get to this point. And are you content that it gets us to a point whereby frontline services are somewhat maintained?
So in response to the last point, the conversations that we've had over the last couple of days, I believe that we will have a police service in a position to deliver in line with the Chief Constable's force control strategy, and able to deliver with due regard to the police and crime plan and the National Police Strategic Policing Requirement, and get crime down, which is, I think, the crux of what you've asked. It's never been easy because we've had to try and make sure we're getting the money into the right place at the right time, and designing a budget. Chief Constable designing a budget that's going to do that. The first few years I had this role, it was really a question of having ambition that outstripped the funding promises. But I think having that ambition and delivering on it was something that won us some extra pots of money around trip patrols, around off-dial patrols, hotspots, investment in dealing with domestic abuse, investment in safer streets, particularly our violence reduction unit. Our violence has been an amazing success. And again, thank you to everyone who contributed to that in partnership. This has been different because it's been a gap. And and it's my ambition, it's not the Chief Constable's commitment, it's my ambition that we should see crime get back to historic lows in this county. And I believe that we have had the resources in place to do that. The challenge here was taking away a slice of those resources, is taking away some of those resources. And that undoubtedly would slow that process. I think with the additional money that we have been able to secure, that the government has been willing to give us at the end of last week, we're in a situation where I think we can maintain the momentum in terms of reducing crime. But actually, that's probably not for me to say. I don't know if there's any comments that the Chief Constable might wish to make.
Well, Commissioner, thank you. Thanks for your support, and thanks for the support of the panel. A couple of things to answer your question, Councillor. Incredibly difficult, and you started off with the staff and the officers and the PCSOs who, subject to a good plan and to your approval today of the Commissioner's request, and of course approval by the Home Office, job's still at risk, but we have a plan, I think, with the Commissioner's support that we can put forward that minimise and mitigates that risk. We have reduced crime, we can maintain officer numbers, but that becomes incredibly difficult. And I will make the point is that we are structurally underfunded, and any support that you can give in order to make sure we've got the right funding to make sure our officers, our staff can carry on reducing crime in Essex is really, really important. The second point around it is to do this with such late notice, and that's not the Commissioner's fault, but you'll have seen the timelines that we've been working to. That's not criticism of government, but the uncertainty from my staff, for the officers and probably some of your family members, and is just not right. But of course, we have done Commissioner support the best to put before, for me to put before the Commissioner a plan that he can support this morning, which I hope he seeks your approval for in terms of the precept element of that today. My commitment is that we will continue to fight crime and do the things we've done. It becomes increasingly difficult. And I think, the recognition that the elected representatives of this county do of that with the Commissioner's support is really, really important to allow the officers and staff and the volunteers of Essex Police to know they're supported and to carry on doing the work they're doing. But it's incredibly difficult, incredibly testing. And of course, it doesn't just bring uncertainty for the people who work for me, it brings uncertainty for the communities of Essex. And that is not something that anyone in Essex Police wants to see. That's not what
Councillor Savage.
Yeah, my question is somewhat redundant from the pre-meeting because the CSO situation has changed. However, I won't lie to you, I was going to come to the meeting today and suggest to this panel that we turn down that precept on the basis that, as a resident of Castle Point, I feel we're getting short shrift, to be honest, from government, not from you guys. I think we get an excellent service from our local policing team. I think as a borough that's probably one of the most densely populated in Essex, we see our fair share of drug-related crime, our fair share of antisocial behaviour. In the 3 years I've been a councillor, we've had 2 murders, so we're hardly sort of like a non-crime capital. And I think the the comment that you made at the pre-meeting, Roger, about front desks closing concerns me because our population is largely ageing. We can't go to Rayleigh anymore, so our nearest stations were Basildon and Southend, and I've heard maybe enlighten me today that Basildon's closing as well, so the nearest station is probably going to be Chelmsford. I think the whole situation is wholly unacceptable, to be honest. I will vote on this precept. I'm not at all at the current situation, and I think I would urge you to go back to government and get us more in line with Yorkshire in terms of our funding, because I think your police officers deserve that more than anything else. Our local community team are excellent, you know, and our local PCSOs, the guys that we see on the front line, are the only police officers that we see on the front line, and they're excellent. So I don't want to lose them. So as I say, I will vote for the precept today, personally. Thanks for all the efforts that you've done, because I think that's excellent.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Councillor Ely. No? Okay, Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I'm mindful that police service and fire service have got a budget to contend with, but we've also got to remember there is an impact on the domestic budgets of all the households in this county. But what I do think is interesting is the view that many people have expressed that the only service provided by the public sector that they're prepared to pay more for is the police. I think that's something that encourages me a bit. I said to Councillor Harris earlier, I don't think I've ever voted for a 6% increase in anything in 30 years in local government. I'm going to today with an element of reluctance because I'm concerned about the people paying the bill. But we do need to give the police the tools to do the job properly. So I wanted to ask, you've answered a couple of my questions already in your preamble, but you talked earlier about the fact that referenda had failed across the rest of the country. And when we had the pre-meeting, there was a comment about referenda, and the timescale looked as though it would have been impossible to do it. Has anybody given any thought to whether the fact that maybe we need to look next year at a one-off, which I won't be happy with, might well support, but do we need to look at a one-off bigger increase next year so that we have a stable platform to deliver the services that the public expect? And I say that as one that does not like tax, full stop.
Thank you, Councillor. So a few well-made points there, and it won't surprise you that I also considered the scale of the increase being suggested here. The idea that our residents should be required to pay more for a reduced service, the one that I found very uncomfortable. And it may well be not too indiscreet, is it, to say, Chief Constable, that this has strained our relationship a bit. Finding a solution that we are jointly supportive of. Having looked through with the team, you know, we do surveys every year. We did one this last year as well. I do a lot of public meetings. We went back through the post-BAG over the last few years. It is the case that we have had support from the public for the precept increases in the past. And the survey that we did in November, December, again, told us that more than half of the respondents, it's only an indicator, it's not a referendum, but more than half the respondents were supportive of a £15 increase in precept this year for police. That is some assurance to me. The real assurance to me is that the number of people who've written in saying we don't want to pay, it's too much, is very, very few when they get the service. The difficulty with this year, reduced service, more payment, that isn't what people really are supportive of. So I am really, really pleased that we are going to be able, subject to the issues that I've outlined to you, to retain the PCSOs. That doesn't mean to say there's no impact of this budget on Essex Police. There is an impact, and there is an impact on people's lives. But overall, the strength of the service will remain good to deliver reduction. In terms of referendum timeframes, so there have been cases in the past where a PCC has proposed a budget with a higher precept than the referendum that has been approved by their panel because they could see the point of the investment. That has then gone out in the council tax bills. The referendum has been held concomitant with the local elections, which is probably the best time to hold it, frankly. And the referendum has failed, and the bills have had to be sent out again, and the first month or 2 months' payments have had to be reimbursed, which is a real administrative model burden on our billing authority counterparts. Not where we want to be. I think we may be in a better position this time around because we have been told that the comprehensive spending review will be announced in the spring. That will mean that we should know the shape of our funding for the next 2, hopefully 3 years before summer. So then we can actually have a discussion around what it is we need to do. My first ask of all of you, and indeed it is principally my job, I'm only asking for support, I'm not asking for my job for me, but my first ask is, please support us in the comprehensive spending review. Please push hard for us to get a good settlement there, in which case we won't need to go down the line that you're suggesting, but we will know in a different time frame rather than 10 days before decision making time. We'll know 6 months before. Thanks.
Councillor Terry. Thank you. I was just adjusting what I was going to say, actually, given in light of the new circumstances. Firstly, I agree with Councillor Ricky and others. I voice similar thanks to the work that you do, the Chief Constable and all the staff, and the headaches, budget headaches you've been having lately, as we all have across many areas of public service. And I was like Councillor Savage, I was in a veto vortex a little while ago, but now I've got into a different phase. And I have got a fairly lengthy question, but I think you'll get the gist of it as we go. So nobody likes paying taxes, but from my extensive experience, people will look very favourably towards community safety and law and order as a key priority in any civilised society. So I do support the proposed increase. Whatever the nuances of this specific budget, the current proposals to remove our police community safety office was unacceptable to me. This will reduce community safety at the coalface of crime and will reduce Essex Police capacity to deal with antisocial behaviour and in particular retail crime, which are key priorities. Given the proven value for money of Essex Police being the 3rd cheapest in the UK, based on cost per officer versus number of population Essex, and the continuing success and overall reduction of levels of crime in Essex, in order to prevent this cliff edge situation occurring again, does the PFCC think that the cap and the Home Office funding formula, the structural problem with it, is set at the right level? And does he agree with having the cap on police resources, on having a cap on police resources at all? I know other areas, South Wales, for example, doesn't have. And should we be in a position where we allow Essex people and the people on this panel who are democratically elected and charged with overseeing the police and crime plan to be able to ensure the PFCC can maintain and fund safety in Essex appropriately, and to avoid this financial cliff edge situation in future, so we can focus on the job in hand, which notes Councillor Ricky said. We need to address the funding formula, which has let us down. So I'm hoping that I'm not clear whether the comprehensive spending review will help to address that disadvantage we have, because that's what we need to do. We've got to fix that funding formula. But also, I would like to see us free to, if Essex, I know Essex people want safe streets. We all want that. And we should be able to support that for our residents. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Quite a wide-ranging question. The simple answer is yes, please. So I strongly believe that the things you've highlighted there need fixing. I don't think that the comprehensive spending review is necessarily going to fix them. So if there are a number of things that I really welcome support all parties and all partners in this county around. One is the comprehensive spending review. Can we please have nationally the deal for fire and rescue that we need to have? And we will share with you some briefing points around that so you know what we are. The second is the police funding formula is excruciatingly unfair, particularly to Essex. There isn't a police service in the country that thinks it's fair. I've put a lot of personal effort into working with the Home Office and the National Police Chiefs Council into redesigning a better funding formula. That is work where we've been supported by the University of Cambridge, by the London School of Economics, by various other universities, I think, including Bristol and Brighton across the country. And experts from the MPCC, APCC and Home Office. It is there and ready to go. It was not implemented. It was put on the shelf November a year ago because, of course, it has winners and losers. If you have a fixed pot of money for policing, so as I said, £19.5 billion at the moment, then if you're talking about changing the way that's allocated, some go up and some go down. Now, most forces will be in the middle and see a bit of a tweak here or there. But the harsh reality is Metropolitan Police would go down and people like us would go up. And the idea of taking money away from the London Metropolitan Police when London has a crime crisis. We have been both fortunate and, I think, skilled, able in this county through our violence and vulnerability unit to reduce the number of people being hurt in drug-driven knife incidents by 24% over the last few years. London's gone completely in the opposite direction. The national press are full of it. I find in my public meetings, I get people not believing what we've done in Essex because they read, whether it's in the Mail or the Mirror or anywhere, they read about how horrible it is in London. That dominates the highlights, the headlines. We are doing better than that, and therefore the money's going to where the problem's biggest. You know, in that 1.1 billion nationally we were talking about of funding increase across the piece for policing this year, outside of the funding formula, the government is giving an extra 65 million to London on top of its funding formula share, because London has real problems. No one's going to take a funding formula that takes money away from London and say it's fair. So do you deal with that through a transitional arrangement? I think the only real way to do it is to do it at a time when there is a big inflow of funding into policing and we can get evened out. But that hasn't been possible either, really. It certainly isn't possible this year. The way that previous governments have approached it has been to say you can have more precept freedom than perhaps your local authority counterparts, and it can be a fixed sterling amount as opposed to a percentage. So those with lower precept have a bigger percentage increase. That's done a little bit around the edges, and we've moved from being the second worst funded force to being the third worst funded force. That's a step forward. Step forward. The part of the solution undoubtedly would be precept flexibility. I have campaigned for precept flexibility and will continue to do so. I think you're right that we shouldn't have a limit. The Welsh PCCs do not have a limit. The mayors, the metro mayors do not have a limit. In Wales, where that has been the case for a long time, on average, abandoned property has a precept which is roughly £80 higher than on the average for England. So Wales is higher. They have increased to compensate. You need to think about whether that's something you support, because what you're saying is give me the freedom to mean that we aren't actually having to do the extra 65 reductions in police staff. that we're having to do in this sort of shape, which would mean that I would have to be adding a bit more on. You know, we'd probably be more like £22 than 14 if we were doing that. That's a bigger increase. Would you support it? But at least we could have the discussion here in Essex about what matters for Essex. And if you didn't support it, you could send me and the chief to go away, talk to the chief constable again, and come back with a different plan. Yeah. At the moment, we are at the mercy of a one-size-fits-all approach, which has to compromise between the various different parts of the country. So I agree with you. Precept flexibility, and I would be accountable for that through the ballot box and to you. So that would work, I think.
I'd just say thank you for your response, but also through the chair, I think we should have that discussion. I know we don't want to talk about money all the time, but we've got a year's a short time. So I think we need to think about that as a panel so that we can help our Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner and help, most importantly, help the residents of Essex to ensure they've got the safest possible outcomes in their communities.
Councillor Ricky.
Thank you, Chairman. I think to kick that off, and I think with support or agreement from the panel and Dorset Commissioner, I'd like to resolve that our Chairman, John Giddy, was actually writes to the Home Secretary, picking up some of these points that has been mentioned, and maybe the Policing Minister, Diana Johnson, as well, just to highlight some of the issues that we have brought up this afternoon. So I think very individually they're all very valid. I think aggregationally, I think it forms a compelling case to, I wouldn't say force them to, but at least put it on their radar, points that we have made today, especially taking into account the head per capita and the fact that we are the second lowest, which would be great if crime reflected that. But we are bounded by the likes of London and the Metropolitan Police, and the millions that are being invested there. It would be great if it was reducing the impact that some of their crime has on us, particularly with things like county lines, etc. But it doesn't, and that puts us at an even worse advantage. So I would like to that we ask our chairman to write, if that's okay,
very grateful
to the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister to highlight some of these issues. But I think that's the springboard for us to have some future conversations around how Essex Police is future funded. I so move.
Councillor Terry, are you happy to second that?
I'll second that happily, yes. Thank you.
And can I ask for a show of support from members? Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So going back to the questions, Councillor Wrigley.
It really follows on from Councillor Ritchie's point, which is, I mean, my borough, Brentwood and yours, borders London. There are considerable challenges in managing what comes from London into Brentwood, which Force has responded to. Of course, further around the county, we have ports, we have airports, we have extensive rail networks, perhaps more extensive than other parts of the southeast, and these all pose considerable challenges which structurally need to be reflected in the way in which government looks at us, so that we can serve all our residents, not just in Brentwood, but elsewhere. And I feel that that is really important, and that is why I fully support the suggestion that we write to the Home Secretary and empower future discussions on this, so that we cease to be the third worst funded police authority in the country. One thing that really occurs to me is that as a panel, we're very supportive of the successes that you've made, but we're also very cognizant of the challenges. And this is possibly the most significant challenge we've faced in a while. And I think we have to meet it and, if necessary, speak out so that the ordinary men and women that work for the service know that we are behind them 100%.
Thank you, Councillor. You make very good points. Thank you very much.
Mr. Rigby, you have a second question. Would you like to ask that now?
Commissioner, clarify how money received from previous asset sales, such as, for example, the sale of Brentwood Police Station in the past, relate to past budgets, and explain in simple terms, how that money has benefited Essex Police previously and how it may do in the future in bolstering our reserves?
Thank you. A very good question. I may at some point actually ask Ms. Perry to help me out a bit on this, but overall, we have made disposals of about £68 million. They have reduced our running costs by about £1.4 million a year. So that's another £11 million over the period. And that's had a positive impact. We have some more to do. Yeah. The big investments that we've made, we've done things like Southend Custody Suite. That cost £9.5 million. We've done things like moving into the town hall in Brentwood, which has worked really well. As you know, the sale of Brentwood Police Station raised about £8 million. That's part of those totals. The big investment, really, we've been using disposal of assets which were not being well used or were at end of life and needed to be redeveloped to invest in IT. So all the cops now, they didn't used to have, they've all got one of those. They're all capable of doing things while they're out and about. They don't have to return to the station all the time. The increase in productivity, i.e. availability to be out with the public, is probably more than 10% of an individual police officer's time. That's been part of the stronger and in a position to do the reductions in crime we are doing. The more we invest in better technology, live facial recognition, hugely powerful, very good at taking people who are already wanted by the police off the streets. Coming now, well, we've done the live facial recognition. Coming now, investment in automation of some of our processes where we link up with the CPS, taking hours of drudgery out of a police officer's time and ending up with better quality case files at the end, which will result in hopefully more frequent early guilty pleas, and therefore saving the court's time as well. That's where the money's gone, and it's been across the county as I've described. You know, it's been a large amount of money. It has not gone into reserves. With the chief constable's agreement, support, whatever it is, together, we have taken the view that this has not been the time for building reserves in Essex Police. We've had a situation where crime was rising, and that needed to stop and be turned around. So we have not been building reserves. We've been getting traction on the front line. I have to admit, that is in part why a tight year such as this is so painful for us. Talk to my colleague, which you won't mind me saying, in Hampshire. They have chunky reserves. So whilst they're in a similar position to us in an individual year, they can weather it, fill the gap. We haven't got that. If we had to do what we said we would have to do 10 days ago, we would have been seeing a third of our total reserves disappear to achieve the changes that we needed to make. That's going to be better now as well.
Thank you. So the next question is from myself, and it's to ask the commissioners for clarification what is meant by detectives allowance and the South East allowance. What does this mean in practice for the individual? And then to add to that, what does this mean for the service with regards to retention and recruitment?
If I may, I'll refer that to the expert.
Yeah, so the discretionary allowance for officers, we can pay up to £3,000 of South East allowance. It's a regional allowance to compensate. London gets about 7,000. And we were up and currently in this financial year paying £3,000 with almost all officers and staff. Some who are more senior in service don't get it, but almost all officers and staff do. We put that up halfway through about 3 years ago. We increased it from 2,500 to 3,000 to ensure that we attract, retain, and develop and recognise the hard work that we've all talked about, the officers. So we're reducing that by, for 2005, 2006, by £250 for all officers. Now that That secures £1 million worth of savings. That's that. We also, I've got the discretion to pay what's called targeted variable payments, up to £5,000 for individual officers for specific things, either because the work they do is particularly important or difficult, or indeed it's a hard to fill role. Pay that to detective constables currently, and will continue to the end of this financial year. We pay £1,200 to target variable payments, and the rationale for that was we need to grow our detectives. They don't work a 24/7 shift pattern. Changes to police regulations show that if you don't work a 24/7 shift pattern, you don't get unsociable allowance. So there was a deterrent. We said, how do we encourage uniformed officers on a 24/7 shift pattern to become detectives? Both important roles. And they said, well, it's £1,200. So we said, how do we remove that barrier to encourage people to go down the detective pathway for £1,200? And that's what we did. It was always dependent upon, as we've had a successful detective program, we're growing the number of trained and accredited detectives each year on year. When it came to the end of that, I'm not a fan of paying people because one person's role was more important. All of the roles are important. You tell me which one's more important around that. So it was always, once we achieved that record, we would have removed it. The budget constraints, the challenge of closing the gap, mean I've had to remove that payment for detective constables. It's only detective constables. We had no issue with the recruiting sergeants or inspectors. So that's what that is, and that's what we'll be removing. I stress they'll get that will be with effect from the 1st of April, so they'll get the rest of the payment for this year.
Okay, thank you very much. Lisa Castle.
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair. Just coming off the back of your question, firstly, I would like to echo the sentiments of everybody here on the panel and extending our appreciation for the work of yourself, the Chief in securing this funding to allow us to keep our PCSOs. Thank you so much for that here in Essex. I do have a question off the back of what was just asked in terms of the clawback trigger for the programme, specifically in relation to the removal of this southeast or reduction in the southeast allowance and the detective allowances. Are you concerned that the removal of these allowances could lead to a higher than average reduction in headcount, as the officers may seek alternative employment, potentially bringing us below the required staffing levels for the programme and triggering this clawback?
Thank you. It is a risk. Of course, we have turnover in officer numbers, in officers every year. People retire, people change their lives, etc. Some people go off for other services in the country. We have not to date struggled to meet the recruitment profile that we needed. But every year is a new year, isn't it, really? And we are going to be this year really close to our police uplift programme clawback cliff edge trigger. That's a tongue twister for me. Very close indeed. It's going to need very close management. I think the Chief Constable might wish to say how wonderful our HR department is, because they've done a really good job.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really important question. It is a risk, of course it is. We're paying people less. All I'd say, put that in perspective, the pay differential between London and Essex already is about £7,000. That risk is real already. Well, of course, we see officers. I myself transferred from London to Essex, so we see people move in both directions. I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't say that they're policing. It is a risk. I think £250 is about £21 a month. That's easy for me to say, but that is a significant amount for some officers. I think there's lots of people join Essex Police in preference to London. We have not had a recruitment challenge despite the pay differential. I know London have not met their targets. We have exceeded them every time. We've got a good and healthy pipeline of supply. We've got good training partners in Anglia Ruskin, and we've got people who are committed to policing Essex. And in fact, in the last months of the year, our turnover leaving either through retirement, resignation or transfer actually reduced. We lose about somewhere between 20 and 23 a month. So it is a risk. It's one we'll carefully manage. We've got a good recruitment partner. I don't want to lose anybody, because one of the issues that has caused us a problem around why is our pay progression. We've got more people staying and moving to the top end of their salary band and being paid more, which is what they deserve because experience costs money. And that's a good problem to have because that means they're moving 2, 3, 4, 5 years of service. They get better at their jobs. Of course, the challenge we've seen is they're paid more and governments and the funding settlement has not acknowledged that. And that there is a risk, councillor, one we can manage, but one that I'm confident that we should be able to mitigate.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that one of my questions was Councillor Castellar, so thank you very much. That's very good. I wanted to go on about the financial service the review that we referred to in the preamble to this. With that spending review, we need to make sure that we predict what's going to happen over the next 2 to 3 years, as we already said about the fire. That's got to happen because you want stability. You don't want to happen to firefight, if you excuse the pun, at the very last minute, 10 days before a precept is agreed. I am 150% behind that precept raise of £5 a week for a Category D property is, for me, cheap. We don't like raising tax. We know that. I agree that with my colleague here, but it's got to happen. We have to get the service that we want. I already warned the Chief Constable I was going to praise his officers up. In Colchester City, I know there was a lot of worry for a few days about redundancies, about what was going to happen. Those police CSOs who patrol the streets in Colchester come to one of my colleagues is in the audience today, Beer Church Youth Club. The PCSOs even find time to drop in at the youth clubs and talk to local people in care homes. And I think Wayne and Rachel, I wanted to mention specifically as PCSOs that I want to salute and do an exemplary job in confidence in the community. That's neighbourhood policing that the Commissioner was talking about. So I'm fully supportive, Commissioner, on the neighbourhood policing that you were talking about in your preface to this meeting. I want to see more of that, not less. And the only way we're going to do that is have some stability in finance. And I think that's something that we've got to lobby for and make sure that we back you in the future, predicting the crystal balling of what you need for the next few years.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Very much appreciate those words about the service you're getting in Colchester. I very much agree with your view around the stability of finance going forward. I think there's probably just something about change of government and change in personnel in Home Office officials, and there being a learning process that we've had to go through this year, which has been reflecting on how we ended up here. We put in a submission as APCC, MPCC nationally in September and asked for a sum for policing. And I don't think that the Home Office officials that we were talking to quite believe some of the calculations and didn't, for instance, the model you have to have about the impact of police pay progression for increasing skills and experience, and they thought it looked too large. I think we have had to build those relationships over the last few months, and I hope very much they will serve us in good stead through the comprehensive spending review, because I think they now understand a bit better about whether we're spoofing or not.
Talking out of turn, so sort of surprising, isn't it? So PCSOs, I'm glad it's been talked about. I'm glad many members and people in the room have mentioned it. They're like a company. It appears like I've learned quite a lot just in this short time frame that we've had to discuss all of this in the last week. They're like a compass in the wilderness. They're like the cornerstone of community policing and are spoken about very, very highly, certainly in all of the platforms and forums that I've attended or in recent times, and certainly historically. I don't personally have any dealings with PCSOs unless called upon, but certainly in Frinton Walton, where I do sit on the town council, and there are some interesting characters on that council, they were very concerned, as everyone was, with quite short notice, and I totally understand the reasons now behind that and the timeframes that you were dealing with, and I totally think you've done a fantastic job. But there was genuine concern at a meeting last Thursday. You know, some of these PCSOs, I think they've only got 2 at the moment, if I'm honest, but they are funded by the town council, and some have been around for 30 years, or one of them certainly has. So I think, just to wrap up, I just would ask, is it possible to understand better, personally for myself and perhaps for the council themselves, just the fact that they're funded, that they could be taken away with such ease? I think there was some confusion in that room. Do you know what I mean? I know that there's funding part, it's not all funded. But I think for myself and for them, if we could have a bit more clarity on that, I think then we would avoid that sort of type of situation again, and we'd be able to kick back with some ease, if that makes sense.
I absolutely understand and sympathise with the issue. We did actually talk about how we could handle it, and we couldn't find a way to do it on a timely basis, given the dominoes of communications you have to go through to try and get the news out there. Fitton and Walton Town Council have written to me and expressed their concern, as indeed has the Fitton Residents Association.
Yeah.
And I absolutely understand. If we hadn't been able to make the change we have, we would have had to have been having conversations with them about, thank you for the support in the past, what shape can the support take in the future, how can we work together, how can we do what we need to do to keep that far extremity of the county as safe as we possibly can, because we really value the work that, well, the partnership that they have demonstrated, both of those bodies, over many, many years. It's been really, really good and really, really helpful. And I'm sorry that they're bruised and we're going to have to put in the work to make that better again. But as of today, I just need to write to them and say, thank you for expressing your concern, and we've managed to not do it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. A question just following a previous councillor's question, and then I'll defer to my points. With the first is with regards to the councillor mentioned assets that had been sold and previously gone back into policing and the outcomes and the benefits from that. Just a question which I'm happy to take offline afterwards about the assets sold in Thurrock and how they've contributed to Thurrock. I know we're a county-wide police service. I know that, you know, that's the basis that we make decisions on, but there are demonstrable, you know, services and investments in Southend and Brentwood, and I would hope that assets have similarly been fed back into Thurrock. So I really welcome some more detail on those. And then to the precept more directly, again, echoing some comments that have been said already, but just to really emphasise the point that I know that for many it doesn't seem like a lot, the amount that is being increased by for some, but I think it is an enormous amount for those that are counting pennies, and there are so many, sadly, people that are really counting pennies to be able to make, and they're making adjustments to how much they can eat, how much they can heat their homes. So it is a very, very difficult backdrop, and I really do hope that, you know, we kind of don't think about increasing the precept even more for residents, because pay is not going up in equity with the amount of and the cost of living. But many of us as councils will know that. I won't labour that. I just really want to say that it's not a decision I know I personally take very lightly, because it's a lot of money, and I know that others think that too. Question about, again, excuse my inexperience, about what happened with regards to the proposal around the reduction in staff and how it happened. It felt like it was a bit of a surprise, although we did know that there was a gap and there was missing millions to try and for the service to find. But it seemed like last week, all of a sudden, a proposal appeared for an enormous cut to a very, very, very important service. I just wanted to know how that actually kind of happened so last minute, and how it was resolved. I think if you could help us talk us through that a little bit to try and avoid it in the future. And then how many staff are under threat of redundancy now? It is fantastic that PCSOs are, you know, still going to be on our streets, but the backroom staff and other staff are just as important as frontline staff. So again, I don't want, you know, it's so important, and having that loss is still not something that I really like to see. A question, therefore, as well from a previous comment, regards to kind of powers, and in the future, do you think that the devolution proposals might have an impact on the flexibility of what we can do with precepts? I understand that there's still an enormous amount to come out, but is that sort of something that you would like to see? And again, just a final point, that I agree with what's been said about, investment in the importance of the comprehensive spending review. I really do want to see a fully funded service from national government, and that it isn't a preset that we have to increase for people. So I absolutely, certainly will be, lobbying my local representative and government to make sure there is a fully funded service. So any briefings that can be shared on that would be excellent. And I'm delighted that actually you got that extra investment. So, I do welcome the government's investment, and, the Labour government have said that they want to re-establish neighbourhood, policing, and they want to put that investment in. So I really hope we press them on making that happen. I know that I certainly will. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Quite a lot in there, and I'll probably try and work backwards through it. So you're absolutely right. I mean, the government wants to see neighbourhood policing increase, not decrease, and that's been the core of the conversation we've been having with them. And that, I think, is partly why huge surprise. But we have managed to work our way through that. We will get you a briefing on the comprehensive spending review. With regard to precept flexibility, at the moment, Metro mayors have precept flexibility around their economic precept and their fire and rescue precept, but the policing precept is ring-fenced and subject to the same regulations as everywhere else in England. That's not the case in Wales. But it does seem to be the case that the government is minded to increase the flexibility and powers available to Metro mayors over time. That's certainly been what Mr. Burnham in Manchester has experienced. It's what Tracy in West Yorkshire is experiencing. It's going in that direction. As I said, I'm not saying so I can increase it by whatever I want to increase it by. It is accountable to you and to the people of Essex, and we have to get it right. It's not simply a blank check. So just to be clear on that, I agree with you about the difficulties that people have in paying it, which is why we do the work we do to try and judge where it's right. And as you will probably remember, in the COVID year, Essex's economy is somewhat different from other bits of the country. A lot of self-employed people not getting the government support for furlough or whatever it may have been because they couldn't, you can't furlough yourself. We didn't increase by the full amount that year, precisely because of our own economy. You can say that was a mistake now with the benefit of hindsight, because we wouldn't have had as big a hole now because we'd have had that in the base. I still think it was the right decision at that time, given the way that people were suffering at that time. That in more detail if you would like to. How did we get it to being a surprise? We did try very hard to communicate with you through the working groups. With the working groups, we were talking about the size of the problem. We were talking about being able to manage it through a moderate reduction in the actual number of police officers. Police officers wouldn't involve any redundancies because we have an actual turnover of police officers. It's a much bigger number. We've got 3,755 police officers. We've got 96 PCSOs. Turnover 96. So it would have been manageable through the year. We had the conversations with the Home Office about please ease our police uplift programme clawback cliff edge. They were considering that. They came back to us verbally on the 21st of January and in writing on the 30th of January saying no. So that puts us in a situation. We thought they would say yes. We got it. That didn't happen. They decided that they couldn't do it for a small number of forces without doing it for the entire country. They thought if they did it for the entire country, it would reduce the overall level of police officers in the country to an unhealthy degree. I understand the logic. I'm not sure they would really have seen a legal challenge if they'd done it for 9, 10 of us. But that was the view that their lawyers took, and therefore it has to. That's how we got there. I'm not. We tried really hard for it not to be a surprise, but in the end, we couldn't tell you before the Chief Constable was in a position to tell his workforce. So yes, there was a news splash. And I think, oh, you asked how many redundancies now, so it is removing 65.
Circa 65, subject to business cases and consultation with each of those people.
And in terms of assets sold in Thurrock and how that's gone back into Thurrock, we're investing in Grays Police Station right now, aren't we? We can take that offline and talk you through.
Any other questions from members?
Thanks, Chair. So I think something's changed in the way that the police generally are negotiating with the government of the day around budgets. So previously, the police have become very adept at kind of top slicing services across the whole service. So 5 to 10% of cuts, everything gets denuded by that amount. Recently, there's been, I think, an increased level of sophistication. So you've actually looked at all the services. So look, we're comparing the murder squad with domestic violence unit, with neighbourhood policing, and actually we risk assess all of those areas. It comes out that if you cut the budget by X, we're going to lose this service. So I actually think that's a very welcome position for the police service to be in, because cuts mean consequences. It actually means we're going to lose this complete service. So I think actually in articulating that to the public, that's been very clear and I think very useful. If the budget's cut by this amount, would they necessarily see in the short term a cut of 5% across every single department of Essex Police? Probably wouldn't. But actually, if they lose neighbourhood policing overnight, that's going to be felt, isn't it? So I think the first point is around, I welcome the level of sophistication in the way that these negotiations have been had, I think, and very publicly as well. Because the question arising from that is, Commissioner, going forward, police budgets are a live issue. It's going to come back again and again. How confident do you feel in that prioritisation process across Essex Police, that you're well positioned next time round to have those difficult conversations around what the cuts could actually mean? I suppose the second question is, I think, following on from Councillor Holloway's, 65 redundancies. Now, they're police staff. Invariably, what happens when you cut police staff numbers is those functions are then filled by police officers. So what's being done to, I suppose, mitigate some of the impact on the front line? Thank you.
So the last bit may well be one for you. I think we've had that conversation.
Great, Councillor, you recognise that, I haven't salami sliced in the proposals, gone through and tried to prioritise against the threat, harm and risk to the people of Essex. I don't want to lose anybody. That's what we got to the proposals we made, and I'm pleased that, subject to the two caveats that the Commissioner put forward today, that I hope those things will not take place. In terms of those 65 of the assurance that we are not backfilling any of those roles with police officers. That's not to say those roles aren't important, and it won't say that those roles won't have an impact either on the individuals concerned or the work they do. Working with my senior team, I've gone in and said, where are the areas where we choose to do less around certain things, and then to consult on those with the officers and the staff involved to say, how could we do this different, whether that's through automation, through the use of AI in terms of the provision of reports and things like that. None of these things are unessential roles. So we'll look at all of those things, but ultimately it will be some of those non-critical but essential support services that will change. And that will have to change the way we do it. There'll be no officers going into those roles. But of course, there'll be things that won't get done because of that, and we've tried to choose what they are to minimise the impact on people of Essex and indeed on the force.
In terms of negotiation going forward, I think what you describe has been sort of learning of the last few years, but we've learned a lot through this process as well. And I will certainly be talking to my colleague Joy Allen, who is the PCC for County Durham, who is my counterpart at the APCC and leading for finance and funding, and indeed with Chief Constable Stanford of Norfolk, who is the MPCC lead, making sure that we learn and get both sophisticated and skilled in the process as we can through these, as we'll need it in the next few weeks, basically. So we are submitting the CSR evidence now.
Thank you. That
concludes the questions, then we'll move to the recommendations, which are its Fire and Crime Panel endorses the PFCC's decision to increase the police precept by 5.66%, equivalent to an increase of £13 a year. And 60.27 beds for Band D property, raising an additional 9.4 million of council tax precepts. It also notes that the Police Fire and Crime Panel recognises that the Commission has taken steps to close the gap in the budget of 2025-26. Would anyone like to put forward? Okay, and in addition to that, we note the recommendations on the addendum.
Yes.
Yep, agreed. What does that say? Right, so we've agreed to the addendum, and then we need to move back to the precept as previously read. Everyone happy? Agreed?
Agreed.
We'd oppose. Okay, opposing, seconded by councillor Harris, all in favour? Unanimous, but any against? Abstentions? Carried.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Next item of business is to confirm whether or not the reserve meeting date is required for Tuesday the 18th of February. We have both agreed the precepts that is no longer required, but we have, at the request of the chairman, got the additional meeting April. That's noted. Is that in the morning?
Is that a joke?
That will be the afternoon. In which case, there are no other items of business and the meeting is closed at 3:42. Thank you, everyone.